name is Jessica Rhodes. I'm an attorney, legal liaison with the Evelyn R. Green Legal Services Clinic here at JUF. We help low-income families who contact JUF with a civil legal need, matching them with attorneys who provide pro bono legal services. We're always looking for attorneys from the recently barred to the happily retired. So if you're interested in volunteering, you know where to find me here at JUF. I'm going to hand things over to Robert Matanke.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everyone. I'm Robert W. Matanke, past president of the Decalogue Society of Lawyers and current president of the Decalogue Foundation, which is the charitable and scholarly arm of the society. We are always very pleased when we present scholarly topics for information, for debate, and also support scholarship to law students at all of the area universities, as well as a Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And I know when I just said that, Ari Steinberg's probably got his ears perked up. We'll have to talk about that another time. I want to specifically recognize my former dean and president emeritus of IIT, Lou Collins, who's joined with us. One of the fine law schools in the city, that he had a lot to do with building that reputation. Thank you. And to everybody else who's here, because I didn't want to make a mistake and forget people, but certainly for the professor Amit Schechter, who came all the way from Israel, Ari Steinberg, thank you for helping put this together. And to everybody, I welcome you to support the JUF, who has so graciously hosted this event and who provides lots of services for law students, for lawyers, for everybody in need of legal things, and for the state of Israel, for the Decalogue Foundation, and for the Americans for Ben-Gurion University. And with that, I'm going to introduce my old friend, Ari Steinberg, tell you a little bit more about the American Friends for Ben-Gurion University and the program we have today. Thank you all very much.
Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Ari Steinberg, and I am not a lawyer. I am Senior Director of Development for Americans for Ben-Gurion University, and I welcome you all. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Decalogue Society as well as JUF. Many years ago, upon my taking my first position in Chicago, I did work at Federation for a number of years, running the Lawyers and Government Agencies division, and it really gives me great pleasure to be back in the company of all you fine legal professionals. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, envisioned that one day there would be an Oxford in the Negev, where we would make energy from the sun, water from the air, and food from sand. Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, an institution of higher education and research with a mission like no other, is bringing his vision to life. BGU, established in 1969, is the only Israeli university created by government mandate with the mission to be an engine for the development of Israel's Negev region. Today, BGU is a world-renowned institution of research and higher learning that has transcended the boundaries of academia to create a new model of education and research that impacts people's lives in the Negev region, throughout Israel, and around the world. We have some 20,000 students with campuses in Beersheba, Sde Boker, and Eilat. BGU is truly an oasis of innovation, leading research in cyber and homeland security, alternative energy, desert and water research, global health, medical technologies, Israel studies, culture and Jewish thought, and high tech and robotics. BGU is not just a place that has the name of Israel's founder on its door. Rather, we are a modern day manifestation of his ideas for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. I would be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge October 7th, given our 22-mile proximity to the Gaza envelope. BGU, of course, was directly impacted and disproportionately, I might add, by the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Unfortunately, just this morning, received an additional email update with others who have been reported as having perished. To date, we've lost 114 members of our BGU community. That's students, faculty, and other members of the community. At one point, we had almost 7,000 members of the community, mostly students who have been called up to duty. Today, we still have some 2,000 members who are still serving. At A for BGU, Americans for Ben-Gurion University, we do three things. And all of those are in fulfillment of David Ben-Gurion's vision for the Negev. Of course, we raise awareness for the incredible work that we do through programs such as this. We raise financial resources, of course, and we run programs like our signature Zinn Fellows Leadership Program that immerses the next generation of American leaders in both the Negev and BGU's vital work. I would take this opportunity to also extend an invitation to all of you. I know that many of us travel to Israel with regularity, and for those who do, I would encourage you to reach out. We'd love to host you on campus. If you have been to Israel but haven't been to the Negev, now would be a wonderful time, and certainly you haven't seen the Negev until you have been to BGU. So again, thanks to all of you. I'd now like to call upon Michael Trazen. Michael Trazen is a member of the Board of Managers of the Decalogue Society and an active supporter and participant in JUF activities. He is the Executive Vice President of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and a member of the Board of Governors of the International Jewish Lawyers Organization. Michael has served as president of the America-Israel Chamber of Commerce in Detroit, as well as in Chicago. He is a partner in the Wall Street office of Cullen and Dykman, LLP, and his business law practice includes assisting clients in Israel and in Poland. I've had the good fortune to know Michael for many, many years. And I will say that if he's not busy preparing his Shabbat table for all of us to see and admire, Michael may be traveling to Detroit or to Poland or to Israel, but if none of those are happening, you can be assured that Michael is doing something good for the Jewish people and Israel. Thank you again, Michael.
I thought he was going to say, if none of those are happening, you can assume he's dead. Thank God you didn't say that. We're here in the Capitol building of the Kehillah, Chicago, and we have two vital organizations, Ben-Gurion University and the Decalogue Society, and hopefully everybody here is involved in both of those, either as a member, a supporter, a participant. It's Thursday, June 6th, and there have been other June 6th, and two of them that are on our minds this morning were Tuesday, June the 6th, 1944, and Tuesday, June the 6th, 1967. Both of those days were important days for the Jewish nation, the Jewish people, and ultimately to the Jewish state. We are in the middle of a siege. Actually, the Jewish people and the Jewish state have been under siege for as long as they've existed, both the nation and the state. And Ben-Gurion University's role in building a strong Israel, a dynamic Israel, goes beyond the obvious of any university. Because the student body, as you walk with me on the campus a week ago, includes all the faces of Israel, from the Chiloni secular to the religious, the moderate religious, more religious, as well as Bedouin and other Arabs, Palestinians, people who have family in Gaza, not only those Jews and Arabs and Bedouins who have fallen in battle defending Israel, but relationships with those who are on the other side. It's very complex. And Ben-Gurion University includes all of that. Today's presentation by Dr. Schechter is most appropriate because it blends the legal world in our country here, the First Amendment and other aspects of speech with social justice. And what could be more appropriate and what's more central to what's happening in Israel today? It's not just a country at battle with another country. It's not two countries at all, is it? But it's a battle between different concepts of what life should be like. And what's at stake here is not limited to the Jewish people, obviously, but all citizens of the state of Israel, and I would suggest even beyond that. Remembering what the soldiers who went ashore 80 years ago did, which gave many of us in our generation the right to live. Today, we wouldn't be here but for those boys that came, and women, I suppose, that came from all over North America, England, France, Canada, including the United States. We remember them. And we do, if you're of a certain age, remember what was happening on June the 4th, 1967, when Israel's very existence was at stake. We've forgotten that, I think, to a greater degree than we should. It was under siege. You remember the details, some of you. And June the 6th was the second day of that war, and Israel survived. What has happened since is another discussion. Very, very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Amit Schechter. He too is a non-practicing, he's a non-practicing lawyer, I'm practicing. He's a non-practicing lawyer, and he is also the professor of communications at Ben-Gurion University. He has served there as the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and he holds a visiting professorship at Belisario College of Communication. His biography also includes the fact that he has been the editor or the author of 8 different books, and that he has been the president, I think, of the ACRI, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, which isn't always the most popular organization, but I've always been a fan and a supporter of that too. And we welcome him to stimulate us, to give us ideas to talk about, and then questions and answers at the end. Dr. Schechter, welcome.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction, for having me. Move this chair. There were so many introductions going on. I felt like in the Oscars. I just want to say, apropos walking into dangerous places, that I hope that walking with an Eagles cap into a full room in Chicago doesn't annoy anyone here. But I was born in Philadelphia, and that's something you can't take out of the boy. So I will. So again, thank you for having me. I'm looking. Okay, so we'll have about maybe like 35 minutes of my talk, and then I'll open it up for questions. But coming from Israel, I'm used to being asked questions while I'm talking. So if anybody has something to say while I'm talking, that's fine. I want to start and say, I mean, the topic is media during wartime. Is how we chose to title this talk. But my approach to media, to communications, is broader than just the question of the actual technology that mediates speech between individuals. And I will talk about some broader issues than just mediated communications, but more about freedom of expression in general. And in that context, and I will mention it as you'll understand this later when I show some of the examples of what I'm discussing. In my recent work looks at the idea of free expression as only an element of a wider freedom that we need to guard, which is the freedom of communication. For historical reasons and philosophical reasons that are somewhere in the 18th century, we focus on expression as the liberty that we need to guard. But when we think about people communicating in the 21st century, it's time to rethink, I think, that framework and to look at the totality of communication. It's not just about expressing It's also about receiving information. It's about using it. It's about storing it. And all those elements are required in order for there to be a healthy communication process. And this will come up in this conversation. Now, not assuming any type of knowledge, I will kind of give a brief description of the legal situation in Israel, constitutional structure, and then dive more into the recent events and try to hopefully tell you something new that you haven't heard before. So Israel is a country in a constant state of emergency. One of the first acts of the provisional government that was formed right after independence in May 1948, and I think this was on June 11th, 1948, the government announced that Israel is in a state of emergency, which gives the government powers to create rules and laws that supersede those that are created by the parliamentary body, which at the time did not exist. And this state of emergency exists still this very day. Okay, it's so pervasive that in times like this, we need to have rules that are about special cases, special state of emergency, because the state of emergency is a given. And as you know, all Israelis serve in the military, men and women, and in the last 30 years, one of the other achievements of the Association for Civil Rights, women also serve in combat positions, as one of my daughters have, and that of course reflects on the type of society that we have. As was mentioned here, a third of our students were called in at the beginning of the war. Our defense budget is a huge part of the Israeli budget, and you can see it almost doubled since October 7th. And the level of expense on defense is among the highest in the world. Now, you can't compare this, of course, to Ukraine, where it's 34%, but it's still very, very high. When it comes to understanding the idea of free expression in Israel, it's important to understand that Israel does not have a written constitution nor a written Bill of Rights. This is maybe one of the not great things to say about David Ben-Gurion, is that he wasn't crazy about the idea of having a constitution when the state was formed, and the compromise that was reached between the parliamentarians in the early 1950s was that the Constitution will be written gradually in blocks. Each few years, a new block is added to this constitutional build through a legal structure that is called a basic law, and we're still working on it, as they say. Very few clauses of the basic laws are protected clauses. In other words, that they cannot be overruled by regular legislation. None of them has to do with free speech. But already in 1954, and as I'll get back to this decision in a minute, the Israeli Supreme Court at the time recognized freedom of expression as part of the constitutional structure of the state, since the state, as the court noted, has a democratic structure, and as a result, freedom of expression should be one of the liberties that is protected by the system. And this has never been challenged. In other words, the government has accepted for the past 70 years that freedom of expression is part of the system, and we'll talk about those challenges in a minute. In the mid-1980s, when the Rabbi Meir Kahane became a member of the Knesset and spread his racist ideology from the lectern of the Knesset, the Supreme Court defended his right to do so, and to do so on television, stating, following again American jurisprudence in this case, just like in the Kol Ha'am case, that hate speech is part of freedom of expression. Later on, two more famous decisions, one, the Laor decision, minimized the power of what was known until then as censorship over plays and movies. and limited it very, very much, only for types of expression that are a clear and present danger for the public safety. And similarly, in the Schnitzer decision in 1989, the power of the military censor, I'll talk about in a minute, was limited in the same way. In 1992, the Knesset passed one of the most important basic laws to date, the Basic Law, Human Dignity and Liberty. However, that particular piece of legislation does not contain freedom of expression. However, the Supreme Court, over the years, has stated that freedom of expression is part and parcel of human dignity. And as a result, it is still protected, even though the overall constitutional structure has changed. Now, there is a very strong effect of American jurisprudence over issues that have to do with liberties and rights in Israel. And one of them is the issue of freedom of expression and how it is treated during times of emergency and war. American jurisprudence has dealt with this very early on, relatively to the existence of Israel more than 100 years ago, stating that indeed during times of war and emergency, there could be certain limits set on freedom of expression, but that only, just as Brandeis said, only such a state of emergency can justify such repression. In the famous Kol Ha'am decision in 1954, Justice Agranat, who was at the time Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and himself US-born and raised and educated before immigrating to Israel in the 1930s or 40s. There's a wonderful biography of his by Pnina Lahav, to those who would like to read it. Justice Agranat both recognized in the Kol Ha'am case the fact that freedom of expression is part of the Israeli constitutional structure, but at the same time that there are situations when the country goes to war where it can be limited. Just for the sake of what was the Kol Ha'am case, Kol Ha'am, two words mean the voice of the people. The Voice of the People, Kol Ha'am, was a newspaper of the Communist Party in the 1950s. The party, the newspaper published an editorial that criticized the government for supporting the US in its war in Korea. And as a result, the Minister of Interior tried to use their power, according to what was known at the time as the press ordinance, which has been eliminated over the years, to close down the paper for not supporting Israel's support for American involvement in Korea. So that was an easy case to come and say, okay, you know, freedom of expression exists, there's no clear and present danger, but that really set a precedent to this very day. What does exist in Israel and is not similar at all to the United States is the military censorship, which still exists. As I said, there is in Israel a steady state of emergency. That steady state of emergency allows the government to create regulations that circumvent the power of the parliament, the Knesset, to make rules and laws. And very few of these regulations still exist. Over the years, it has been criticized by the courts, and the state has done much, and we will talk about one of these laws in a few minutes, has done much to limit the use of these regulations. However, one of the things that exists as power of these regulations is the military censorship. And the military censorship is very active, as we will see, till this very day. In the 1940s, right after independence, military censorship was used to close down newspapers, especially from the Palestinian Arab-Israeli sector. A very famous case of censorship known as 1956, when the Israeli soldiers massacred 29 civilians in the village of Kafr Qasim at the beginning of the Sinai campaign. This story was silenced by the military censorship for a while until one renegade newspaper, Ha'olam Hazeh, This World, broke out the story, and it became a national sensation. People were tried and went to jail for that, for committing that. Another famous issue involving the military censorship was in 1984. Terrorists overtook a bus on its way to Ashkelon in the south and hijacked it to Rafah, where which is in the center of the news these days. The military went on the bus, killed the terrorists. Unfortunately, one of the hostages was killed as well. 2 terrorists were taken alive off the bus and later killed by members of the Shin Bet, the General Security Forces. The fact that they were taken alive off the bus was censored. However, 3 photographers took photos of those 2 men being taken off the bus, and the newspapers published those photos against the decision of the censor. And as a result, newspaper Chadashot, which doesn't exist anymore, at least at the time, was closed down by the censor for 3 days. And this was in 1984, a very, very famous case. So what we have today is a thing that's called the censorship agreement. It is an agreement between the state and between the newspapers. I don't want to get into too many details, but the idea is that there is a committee. It is chaired by a retired Supreme Court justice. There is a member of the press in it and a member of the military. And when questions come up on whether a story should be censored or not, the press or the military can go to this committee and they agree in advance to accept its ruling. And its rulings are not subject to legal scrutiny. Okay, so this is an agreement that's been around since the 1960s, and still is intact today. Yes.
What happens if there's a story, but then there's not an agreement to go to the committee? Does that ever happen?
No, well, okay. So first of all, it's a referring up system. In other words, the newspapers are the ones that when they have a story, they decide whether they need to go to the censor or not. Okay. And as we will talk about, there's a lot of what we call in Israel, like to call it social responsibility. Other people will call it other things, where the papers have a very high level of cooperation with the censor. So they go to the censor and they ask to publish. Only if the censor doesn't agree would they go to the committee. But the committee still exists till this very day, and we'll see was even very active recently. Naturally, October 7th changed a lot of the rules of play in Israel with regard to freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the media. I will talk a little bit about police, administrative, and court actions, and I will talk about legislation that has passed since the beginning of the war. I have been following, as was mentioned, I am a lawyer by my education, and I worked as a lawyer many years ago as a media lawyer, and I have been following the changes and the attempts to change legislation in Israel regarding free expression in the past year and a half. And so that's how I found myself all of a sudden, when I started that work, I did not know, of course, what I was going to stumble into. Yes, please.
When you talk about media, are you talking about television, newspapers, or are you including social media?
So, okay, well, I guess that communication is a big world. Naturally, television and newspapers, most of them abide to the rules and play the game with the committee and the censorship and all the things that have to do with that. Social media does not, because there is no definition for a social mediator, right, or something by law. We will see one attempt to to do legislation that affects consumption of social media, but not publication on social media. But there are no, as we will see, it's not something that can be controlled in this method. So following the massacre of October 7th, the atmosphere and life in Israel changed significantly, and freedom of expression was one of the casualties of these events. First issue I'll talk about is the issue of freedom of assembly. Like I said, we have no constitutional safeguards in Israel in writing, and freedom of assembly is been protected always by the courts as part of the protection of freedom of expression. Again, very early on, demonstrations were allowed already in the 1970s, and big court decisions of the Supreme Court, which is known in Israel sitting as the High Court of Justice, which is the body that oversees government administrative decisions, has allowed for, has limited the government power in limiting demonstrations. However, since the beginning of the war, we are seeing a lot of attempts by the police and by the government to limit free expression, in particular of the Palestinian Arab community, and in particular of demonstrations that call for new elections and for a change of government. One of the reasons for this, I mean, this is beyond the legal analysis, it's also a political analysis. The government that was formed about 18 months ago is the most right-wing government in the history of Israel. The minister in charge of the police was involved in incitement in the 1990s that ended up in the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, and used to have in his living room a photograph of a man named Baruch Goldstein, who massacred 29 Muslims while praying in the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron, in Khalil, in 1994. And the fact that a person with that career has become in charge of the police has to do with politics, but has a huge effect on the police itself. Now, there is a separation in Israel between the police and the politicians overseeing the police. There is again, a constitutional separation, but as I said, the Constitution is a very weak instrument when you talk about it in Israel. And there definitely seems to be a lot of influence of the current minister in charge of the police over the actions of the police when it comes to approving demonstrations. Now, you need to have a license in Israel for any event where over 50 people gather in order to hear what is known as a political speech. That's what the law says. Okay, this is, by the way, law from the British Mandate time, from colonial times. It's just stated in the law books. Usually, this is a matter, just a formal matter. You apply, you get the license, you decide with the police where the demonstration will stand. It won't block the roads, even though, as we've seen a lot lately, there is blocking of roads. But since October 7th, well, it's since the rise of this government, but especially since October 7th, there's been many more attempts by the police to block that right of assembly. In the beginning, they would not allow demonstrations at all in Arab villages, especially in the north of Israel. Arab Israeli politicians were detained and questioned before starting the demonstrations. I was just reading a story on my way here now. Today, there is it's Gay Pride Week in Israel, or Gay Pride Month, and there was in Tel Aviv, they decided not to run the Gay Pride Parade this year because of the events, but instead they're having a vigil on the beach to commemorate all the gay casualties and victims of October 7th. And one organization has applied to do a parade, walk from that vigil to another area in the city. A police officer called the guy in charge and said, "What kind of signs are you going to be carrying?" Okay, it's okay to carry signs against hatred and against discrimination, but I ask you not to carry signs calling for elections. Now, of course, he's not allowed to say that. And of course, the police is denying that it was said, but it was said. And we see a lot of those issues coming up again and again. The Jewish division in the security forces, there's a thing called the Jewish division, which takes care, oversees, I would say, threats to national security, has invited protesters in advance of protests to explain to them the borders of the protest, things that we've never seen before. On the other hand, the police have admitted that they cannot ban signs against the war, and we are hopefully that they will abide by that. Another issue we've had a big problem with since October 7th is academic freedom. The most famous case was at the Hebrew University. A professor at Hebrew University, Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, so she is of Armenian descent, Palestinian of Armenian descent, was interviewed on some podcasts, and people thought that she said certain things which she did not say, but the university immediately suspended her from teaching. The president and the provost of the university suspended her from teaching, even though they have no power to do so, because there is due process and disciplinary action that needs to take place at a university in order for it to discipline a member of the faculty. There was an outcry of other faculty members. Eventually, she has been instituted, and supposedly the university claims that she apologized for what she said. But this is a case that raised a lot of tension in campuses. Yesterday, I keep getting updates as I was preparing this lecture. I just had to send the slides 3 days in advance. I was afraid I won't get everything updated on time. But yesterday, there was a bill introduced in the Knesset, just a proposal at this time, proposed bill, that will allow the elimination of tenure of faculty members who speak against the state. More or less, that's the words of the bill proposed by the chairperson of the governing coalition. Now, this law won't pass, and if it will pass, of course, it will be stricken down by the Supreme Court eventually. However, the fact that such a law even comes up tells us something about the situation as it is these days, especially when it comes from the Ruan coalition. And probably the most scary thing about it was that the initiators of this bill were students at some colleges and universities in Israel. So the issue of academic freedom for students has also been very challenging since October 7th. Every day on May 15th, Israelis, Palestinian Arab Israelis commemorate the day of the creation of the state of Israel, which for them is a day of mourning. They call it the Nakba Day, which means the catastrophe day. For the past 20 years or so, these demonstrations take place on May 15th. They go unnoticed. It's just like any other group protesting. This year, for the first time in two decades probably, the police would not allow the Arab students at Tel Aviv University to hold their demonstration. The Association for Civil Rights in Israel went to court. The police immediately retracted their refusal and allowed the demonstration to go on. Again, the fact that they even thought of blocking it tells us a little bit about the atmosphere. The fact that it didn't even have to go to court, but the moment that the petition was given in the court, that they backed down and allowed this, tells us something about the strength that still exists in the system to protect free speech. Yes.
I don't know if you're going to get to this, but as you talk about court action, I'm trying to understand how
it
this
works.
connects with the current state of the judicial reform movement in Israel.
Okay, so I'll try to do it in 60 seconds, as they say. There was an attempt prior to October 7th, started in January of 2023, to reform the judicial system in Israel by weakening the power of the Supreme Court, basically not allowing it to do what it does today. Probably this is an example of a case why the power of the Supreme Court should be maintained, because those attempts to weaken the court did not succeed, among other reasons, because of huge public outcry and demonstrations. And then, of course, after October 7th, there was no way to give any attention to that. And then eventually the court itself struck down a law that the Knesset passed, which was weakening the court. But there's no time for anyone to deal with this. So it's kind of situation right now is in stasis. And this is an example on why the court is so important, because it really is the only tool that demonstrators have. I may have needed to explain this earlier. One of the things that is different in the Israeli system is that in the Israeli system, when there is a certain government action such as this, petitioners go straight to the Supreme Court. Okay, the Supreme Court sits in different types of where it is.
It has original jurisdiction over certain matters.
Yeah, it sits as a court of appeals on criminal issues, sits as a court of appeals on administrative issues, sits as a court of appeals on civil issues, but it also sits as something that is derived from the British system. It's called the High Court of Justice. It's all the same justices, okay? But it's called the High Court of Justice. And to the High Court of Justice, which is a remnant of the system of equity in the British system, you can go directly to the Supreme Court to block a government action. And this is what happens in these cases. Okay, so the Israeli Supreme Court is very, very busy, always, and these days more than ever. So there was a demonstration and there was a counter demonstration, and everybody is alive and well, because this important thing is to maintain free expression. Another troubling case that we had, it has to do with teachers. And this has to do with your question about social media. Oh, went out. A teacher in a school in Petah Tikva published some comments on social media against the war. He himself is a reserve soldier, and as are his children who are serving in Gaza as we speak. But he wrote some things against the war, and he was immediately fired by the city of Petah Tikva from his position as a professor, as a teacher of physics in a high school.
In a public high school?
In a public high school, yeah. And the city fired him. He went to court. This was not in the Supreme Court. This was in what we call a labor court, which is a different type of jurisdiction. And he was reinstated by the court. However, more on a technicality and not on the questions of free expression. Another case we had was an Arab teacher in a Jewish school who participated in one of those Nakba parades that I was talking about before, even though the parade itself, as I said, gets all the permissions. And she was called to be investigated by the police and was suspended by the school. She has also since been reinstated. But again, raising a question of freedom of expression in the educational system. As far as the power of censorship, I mentioned the censorship before. You can see the graph. Okay, there has been a rise in the number of stories that have been redacted or completely censored by the military censorship in the past year. And it's reached the highest number it ever had since this organization, 972 Magazine, has started following those. We don't know what the stories are. We just know the number because the censor has to provide us with the numbers through FOIA type of requests. But we can see that the military censorship has become very, very active. Yes.
Your graph shows the entire result for 2023.
Yes.
You have data which shows the difference of before and after October 7th.
No, because they wouldn't give it to us. Not just to us, to the organization that asked it. The military censor refused to share when this is happening because that's in itself apparently a secret. But all we have is the totals. Yeah, it's a good question. And it's especially a good question because I have an answer. So at least I'm prepared for it. Let's talk a little bit about legislation because I do want to leave time for more questions. With all the massive legislation we're talking about, only 3 laws have passed that have to do with the war situation since October 7th. The first one, I just want to mention it it has a very, very long name, as you can see. And it's a law that allows the police and the General Security Service to tap into stationary cameras, okay, that are in the public space. But so much work has been put into this very particular action by the police, the military, and the General Security Service for something that I think most of us will understand that could be needed in a time of war when you want the documented stuff coming out of these cameras. And the number of debates in the Knesset regarding this and secret committees and God knows what. And eventually it turned into a temporary limited time order for 6 months. And just yesterday, it was extended for another 6 months. Okay. But this is an example, and this example I'm using because on the other hand, the finger has been much, much easier on the trigger in some other cases. The third case would be the one that I'll talk about more. I was asked again about social media. One law that passed after October 7th is the Amendment number 9 to the Counterterrorism Law. This particular law criminalizes consumption of terrorist information or terrorist-inspired information. Now, this is something that doesn't exist in the system at all. Interestingly, the state which initiated this legislation had planned it already before October 7th because they felt there was a need to control consumption of certain type of information over the internet. Right after October 7th, they brought this to the Knesset, but what they asked for was a very, very, very wide mandate. And eventually, an amendment was accepted to this particular law that only consumption in circumstances that point to possible identification with the goals of the terrorist organization are the ones that can be targeted in this case. But even that is precedent setting and something that we've never seen before. And I wonder how that can be dealt with in other countries where have stronger constitutions. The third law, which got a lot of coverage in the media, is what is known as the Al Jazeera law. That's, of course, only that's not the official name of the law. This is the law that has to do with blocking broadcasting of foreign rebroadcasting or retransmission of foreign satellite channels on Israeli cable and satellite networks. This was already started in November as an effort. It was first passed not as a law by the Knesset, but it first passed as one of those emergency regulations. And it gave unique power to the Minister of Defense to say that a certain channel jeopardizes the security of the state, and as a result, it should be taken off these platforms. But nobody took Al Jazeera off these platforms because, as many of you know, for political reasons, Al Jazeera is funded by the Qatari government, which is the main negotiator between Israel and the Hamas. And that did not seem like a very smart political move. And it was blocked at the time. But certain elements in the Israeli government kept pushing for it. And eventually, in the beginning of April, a law passed. Okay, the law passed that allows and it moved the jurisdiction for deciding whether a certain channel jeopardizes the security of Israel from the Minister of Defense, who was against using this law, to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Communications, who both wanted to use this law. And Al Jazeera was shut down in Israel for 45 days. As part of its being shut down, even a feed of Associated Press was shut down because Al Jazeera was using it. Okay, that was shut down for 2 hours. Then somebody understood that the Associated Press is not a foreign channel and is not an enemy, and they gave them the camera back. However, that of course caused a lot of damage to Israel's image around the world. Yesterday, now this particular law is in front both of the Supreme Court and was in front of the District Court in Tel Aviv because the law requires the state after closing down the channel to go to the District Court and ask for their permission, but only after the fact. Yesterday, the District Court approved the closing down, but shortened it from 45 days to 35 days because they said there was not enough evidence that there was indeed a danger to the state's security. Today, I just saw again on the way here that the government has said it was going to ask now for additional 45 days. Each time you have to ask for 45 days and get court approval for that. The case in front of the Supreme Court is still pending. The first discussion of it was this week, and we'll see where that leads. I want to finish just by one more sentence because I really want to leave time for questions. Beyond the legal questions, there is, of course, the question of media coverage. We have, I would say, two very opposing views of that in Israel. On the one hand, there are those that see the cooperation of the Israeli media with the military as something that is positive, as something that is contributing to the state's resilience and its unity in face of the challenges that it is seeing now as a result of October 7th and the war. Others say that the fact that the Israeli media is really withholding information from Israelis, especially about what the war is doing in Gaza, and it does not show much of the destruction in Gaza, that is something that one day Israeli media will have to ask themselves whether they really served the public interest while doing it. So I thank you at this because I do want to leave time for questions, and please.
Are you
Yes.
aware that there was a report on CBS Morning News this morning about young Israeli men going into the eastern Jerusalem as a part of Jerusalem Day and doing circle dances and saying things, chanting things like death to Arabs and intimidating the population there, and that the CBS News crew was asked to leave or was requested to taken off, removed by either the police or the military.
I'm not aware of this particular story. It's not surprising. What has been going on in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem Day has been getting worse from year to year. Our younger son's girlfriend, they're not right now, is the reporter for Channel 2 and who reports about in Jerusalem, the Channel 2, Channel 12 now it's called, for in Jerusalem. And she was there yesterday during what was going on, a lot of violence, instigated in this case by Jewish extremists. Yes, and a lot of restrictions on the media. That doesn't surprise me in that sense, but nothing I can help with. All right.
I don't know generally about the police. Is police in Israel national as opposed to?
Yes, yes. The police in
opposed to-
Israel is national.
Which is not the way it is in the United
Right.
States.
It's national.
Yeah, what's the situation with Haradim in military service? I thought there was a case before the court that was going to be decided at any day now.
There is a case before the court. I must say that from the perspective of things that I deal with, it's more what I can say is not something that I study, but something that I read in the papers. This has been going on for quite a few years now. About 10 years ago, the Supreme Court has decided that the exemption for ultra-Orthodox men from serving in the military conflicts with the principle of equality, the constitutional principle of equality. And since then, the government has been trying to circle the square and both make sure that everybody serves, but that the Haredim don't, but that the ultra-Orthodox don't. And each time they come up with a new solution and the court strikes it down, and they've reached a deadline that was given to them by the court, which is pushed a few times. And this, I think on Sunday, there was a debate in the Supreme Court, which was even broadcast live. Once in a while, cases that have a lot of public interest are broadcast live. It was broadcast live, and the court needs to give a decision. The decision, though, is not something that will force immediately people to serve, because that's technically not possible. But the point is that the ultra-religious youngsters that don't serve is because they are supposedly studying in the yeshiva, and then they get funding for studying. So the question is whether they deserve to get the funding if they don't serve. Okay, so that's how it's being dealt with from a legal standpoint. And if while the court can't force everyone to be drafted tomorrow morning, they can force the government to stop funding those yeshivas, and that will create a huge crisis in that community, because that's how these youngsters make a living. Yes, please.
Since October 7th, I've been struck by reports and voices from within Israel in comparison to voices within the diaspora community. And the theme that struck again and again from within Israel is that people outside can't really understand the significance, the magnitude of October 7th from within Israel and the ongoing trauma. And so my question is, your report of reductions to what we would view as almost sacred civil liberties, are they of concern within Israeli civil society right now, given what everyone is living through? Or do they view this as just another thing that has to happen to safeguard the society?
No, they're of huge concern within Israeli civil society. As was mentioned, one of the things that I do is I chair the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. It's not the size of the ACLU. It's a small organization. And our staff is overworked. It's not just issues of freedom of expression. I don't want to say bigger issues, but there are issues. There are issues of imprisonment of terrorists, and we're working very hard in the courts this week. Actually, again, this is all news from today and yesterday. The state has told the court that it will minimize the number of terrorists held in these encampments, which are very much Guantanamo-like, and they will and it's all because of the pressure that civil society puts on the state on these issues. We're not the only organization. There are others. You saw these FOIA. That was by the Association for Freedom of Information and other organizations that work very hard. Civil society has been flourishing in Israel since the 1990s, and has become a major player in politics and in especially in going to the when the courts widened the right to petition, and by what we call the public petitioner. And so it's not a person we don't need to have an individual prisoner to represent in order to go to the court. We can go to the court as a public petitioner, and it's something that we can do. Yes, these are trying times for civil society, and yes, I think that people that don't know Israel well and have not lived in it and know its people well don't understand what October 7th has done to the national psyche. And I can say, even among my friends and my colleagues, we have very differing points of view about what we should be like and look like after it happened. Yes, please.
Your area of expertise is the media.
Yes.
Curious on what you would suggest should be done because of all of the misinformation in the media. We keep reading articles. Sometimes they attribute the health ministry in Gaza about how many, it's 35 or 36,000 men, and no men, just women and children have been killed. And obviously the United Nations finally even recognized that that's not true. And sometimes they'll attribute it to the Gaza health ministry. Sometimes they won't. We all know that this is propaganda being delivered by Hamas as one of their tactics. How do we counter that and expose it and get the media to tell the truth?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Yes, we've reached a situation. What's that?
Repeat the question. We can't hear.
Yeah, the question was how to deal with misinformation in this in the new environment, where much, in this case, Hamas propaganda controls I think that's what you're saying, controls the
most of the world
news story for most of the world. Look, there's no easy answers for that. I know I can give such a long answer on this, because there are issues here that have to do with sociology and psychology and media, and news flow. And if I may say so, in this room, anti-Semitism as a driver of much of the consumption of this type of information. I've always, and this is, I guess, why I'm here now and why I do the things that I do. I've never believed in censorship and in blocking information. I believe that the way to deal with misinformation is by providing more information and better information. And I think that Israel has failed terribly in this. I think that the failures of the Israeli government as of October 7th, first not being able to defend its own citizens, then conducting the war the way it is being conducted in a very, I would say, controversial way that doesn't necessarily bring good results. And part of the failure is the failure in controlling the media story, because that has to do with all the other failures that come along with it. I mean, when you think about it, it's hard to understand how. I mean, we all remember October 8th and where the world stood on October 8th, and all the world leaders flying to Israel, and the US president and the German chancellor and the British prime minister, and everybody dancing around Israel as the victim. And 8 months later, I think that there is international unity in seeing Israel as the villain. And we need to ask ourselves, how that has happened. It's very hard to, give a short answer on how to deal with the misinformation. I mean, you just have to have a good information arm that provides the information, and that is how to address and attract the right people that have influence. But not much of that. Again, unfortunately, one of the large failures of Israel since October 7th has been the control of information. Yes, please.
To what degree, if at all, do the courts in Israel cite or look to American law cases like Sullivan and Neer versus Minnesota and all of these cases in our own jurisprudence that are so appropriate to the situation today?
The answer is a lot.
Would you repeat the question?
Yes, the question was how much do Israeli courts look at U.S. precedents when it comes to cases of freedom of expression? And the answer is that is the source of freedom of expression in Israel is almost everything you will find in the landmark decisions in the Israeli courts are quotes from American decisions, very little from the UK. So it has a huge impact on Israeli jurisprudence. Not everything is accepted. Okay, for example, Sullivan is not is not accepted. Does not meet Israeli criteria of the law. But other questions such as military censorship and so, as you know, they do. Yes, please.
No, what I really hope with the press and this talk is what could we as lawyers do to combat some of the misinformation that's floating around, the half-truths. Here, there's this morning's New York Times, or yesterday's, Israel secretly targets U.S. lawyers with influence campaign in Gaza. And then, well, there's a case was filed in the Eastern District of Virginia about all the misinformation that Hamas and the successors are circulating that are creating all these demonstrations, all the anti-Semitism on American university campuses. There seems to be a collective amnesia that the modern day state of Israel is built on the ashes of the 6 million Jews perished during the Holocaust.
No, I totally agree with you on this. I think both sides, as we know, are trying to affect the media, and definitely the Hamas came more prepared for this particular situation, and they're doing a better job. There's no question about it. And Israel has failed miserably in the media. I totally agree with you. I see this. I go, I'm an academic. I go to academic conferences. I have, colleagues that I don't talk to anymore. And, you see where I come from when it comes to certain issues and political aspects of what I see is important to save and maintain in Israel a democracy. But on the other hand, I can also point about the misinformation and misunderstanding of the total viewpoint. And I think Israel failed miserably in this counter war about propaganda.
Justice Jackson once said, Bill of Rights isn't a suicide.
Yeah.
There are limits on expression during wartime in this country.
Oh, definitely.
And they're there for good reason.
Definitely. I know we're beyond time. I can stay longer, but it just people need to. I don't know what's past the time, but I'm willing to answer more questions. Yes.
I have a statement and a question. First,
yes.
Statement is, yes, Israel has failed miserably in the public relations, but I think the entire world Jewish community has failed as well. I think we're guilty of that here in the United States. His point, everybody's. My question is with regard to military censorship. Are there written criteria as to what should be censored or what should not be censored, or is it just on a case-by-case ad hoc basis?
So there are very detailed written criteria. It's pages upon pages. that the censor has provided the Israeli news media. I think that there's so many criteria there that it basically applies to everything or nothing. And so in the end, it's a question of common sense. The editors in Israeli news outlets know when they need to go to ask for the censor's approval. It's
What would happen if they publish something that is actually published in the newspaper?
right.
And it's something that may be borderline should or should not have been censored or brought to the committee. Is there anything done after the fact? What happens?
Well, a lot of stories get published. These days, to try and block things through censorship is almost impossible because it's immediately leaked to somebody abroad. They publish it abroad. Then an Israeli paper writes, as a newspaper in London wrote, or it says based on foreign newspapers and so forth. The most famous story is, of course, famous story of Vanunu with the nuclear facility in Dimona. Till this very day, Israel does not admit that there's a nuclear facility in Dimona, and every newspaper, when he writes about it, it says according to foreign sources. So there really is not much that can be done if you do want to overcome it. There have been cases of, I don't think it's even 10 years of an Israeli journalist that had to leave the country. The woman that leaked him the information went to jail. There's actually they made a documentary about it. He had to leave the country, and eventually the newspaper reached an agreement with the censorship and the police that allowed him to come back. So if you circumvent the censorship knowingly, then definitely you can.
There's criminal penalties.
There are criminal penalties. Yes.
Before we
Yes.
continue questions, I know that we're past time, so you're welcome to stay and
Sure.
answer these questions, but I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm Rachel Morup. I'm the Associate Director of Development for A4BGU in the Midwest. And I don't see Sarah, but Sarah Mapes from JUF with the Young Professionals Network, and then Aviva Pat, the Executive Director for Decalogue. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you, Professor Schechter, for this really insightful conversation. And you're all welcome to stay. Yes, I know we have questions, but
Yeah,
just want to say thank you for coming. If you have to leave.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be happy to answer more questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, I compare the banning of Al Jazeera in Israel, the banning of Russia today in Europe.
Uh-huh. What, how is it different?
Well, can you compare them?
I don't know the case in Europe very well. I think that Al Jazeera, the question was whether it endangers Israeli security, not by what it broadcasts out of Israel. Okay. And there is no proof that it endangers Israeli security in any way, or that any information that it has carried has not been carried by other news outlets. So as long as the question of security doesn't really exist, there is really no reason. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to block a news outlet that speaks to the Arab world and shows Israel. That the fact that it's propaganda, yes, it's propaganda. But it's not propaganda that's run by an enemy. I mean, Qatar is not officially an enemy state. Okay, it is part of the Israeli. The heads of the Israeli Mossad go to Qatar to handle. They fly there. Okay, I mean, I've been there. I've switched planes in Doha Airport. It's not an enemy country, and when you decide to block information with a country that's not that you actually are seeking to create a better Middle East, then I don't think that it makes a lot of sense. I don't think that blocking that information in any way promotes anything in Israel, makes anything better in Israel. And you need justifications for blocking speech. I don't know what the Europeans have done. I don't follow that particular case, and so I don't know what the reasons were for that. But I just can't see how you can justify limiting information when there is really no clear and present danger to public security. That's my position at least. Yes.
So let me ask you, if there was some unforeseen change in government in Israel, and you either had a center or a center-left government in place, how much of this you think would change in terms of the governmental activities? If you didn't have this experience in government?
It's a very good question. At this point, not much, but the atmosphere can change. I mean, I really didn't get too much into the main issue is, I think there are two main issues. One is the police. Yeah. And the other is the legislation. I think that under a it's important to notice that when the law, the dignity, human dignity base law passed in 1992, it was under a Likud government. And the Likud platform in the elections in 1992 was the strengthening of human rights under the Constitution. That was 30 years ago. Even the right wing, or the Likud, never cooperated with such extreme right. In the 1980s, when Kahanen was a member of Knesset, Likud members would leave the plenum when he spoke. They would walk out. So what happened is not a matter of center right or center left. It's a matter of a coalition with the extreme right. And I think that once it becomes again illegitimate to make such coalitions, and I think, in the US we see similar issues here as well. I think when it becomes again illegitimate to make coalitions with such forces, then we'll go back to a status quo that is more reminiscent of what we would like to have as a democracy. It's more a matter of atmosphere because, as I mentioned, only 3 laws passed. One has to do with cameras. Okay, so it's like nothing really terrible is happening, but the atmosphere is bad, and the atmosphere is bad because of the legitimization of forces that 30 and 20 and 10 years ago. I mean, before the last election, Netanyahu always made sure not to be seen on stage with the guy that is currently his minister of police. He would come to events knowing that he has already left because he didn't want them to be photographed again, because he didn't want to be seen associated with it. So this is something, then this is as recent as 2 years ago. So the change here, the transition here has been dramatic, but it's because of coalescing with the very, very extreme right, which is racist, nationalist, and extreme that is beyond what I think what a democratic country should allow. But again, I'm against banning any party from running. Okay, they should run. It's a sorry state that they get elected. That's probably where we stand. Okay, yes, one more.
Okay, I don't know the exact language that they used to justify the censorship for Al Jazeera, but I was curious whether the language that was used could be applied to censorship of internet sites, and whether there is any. Israel isn't a country you would think would go to that kind of measure. China certainly does. It can be done. But is the language being used, can it be segued into?
No, the language is very limited. It's only for retransmitting over cable and satellite. It is not, it can't be blocked over the internet. Yes, it was very, very narrowly targeted to what is possible. And yes, Israel is not China or Iran. It's not. Still not. Far from it. Okay.
That's really.
Well, thank you, those who stayed. Thank you all.
I'm not born in Philadelphia, we should know.
I moved to Israel, oh, really? Oh, wow. Well, we're not, my family lived there. It's not that they're Philadelphians. And actually, my parents taught in the Solomon Schechter School. Really? So how old are you?
So you're really more there than that.
So we lived there from 59 to 64. My parents may have children. My parents lived there. They lived in Winchester. Oh, really? Gaynor Road. And,
But everything else is good, like.
and but we're not from there. I mean, my parents came there for my father's. He was at Penn.
27 Gaynor Road, that's where my grandparents lived.
Okay, we lived on 50/50 Gaynor Road. We had this old couple living in the building upstairs, called the Kazakovs, brother and sister. And for my older brother, that was my older brother, they were like his grandparents. Israel and Argentina. And so your parents, they're still living, may have known the Kazakovs because they lived there for years, for many, many years. I used to come visit. My mother taught Hebrew there. Yeah. In the early 60s. I wish I mean, my father's passed away. My mother's memory is not such as things like that. Okay. Oh, I know Tirza.
Right.
Yes, of course. Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
That's funny. Oh, okay.
I just wanted to thank you.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, yeah.
Today I was deprived from seeing my grandson bathe, which usually every day at this hour broadcast live on Zoom.
You should miss.
But he went to sleep, so that's it. So I lost it for today.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, how do you sit? Like, I Syracuse is something like tired. You know, like, Israel town.
I know the name.
Yeah.
So there was a large Israeli Israelis who friends of my parents.
You know, like, I don't want to go to school.
They were all studying engineering there, so they were sent by Israel to study at Penn.
I went to class, my class was Shlomo.
Yes, thank you. That's funny. Yeah, well, unfortunately, I mean, I wish I could ask my mother. I doubted that she would remember.
Right, but I'm saying I could.
And I was younger.
Okay. Well, my brother was born in 56. He might have. I should ask him. Yeah.
But not making like.
Did you go to the Kibbutz?
No, by the time.
Maybe an afternoon.
It's almost like
Right, yeah.
Here's someone, for 1 year.
Yes, I
That's
know
an
that.
untapped.
No.
And you don't have. I'm just saying.
Clearly you left an impression on me.
So what, I mean, basically our faculty came from lives of engineering students.
Right. Yes, yes. And those were my parents' friends. My father was not an engineering, so he was a little oddball.
They weren't teachers, Dr.
No,
they walked into,
that's
they
it.
said, Anima the American.
That was it. Yes, and they taught Hebrew. Exactly. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yes.
Small world.
And if.
Yeah, and I guess the names are,
No, that's your-
our name is the same
I
name,
went
just,
on,
there's
I
just
get to fill all
different
that word, you know,
spellings.
like for the.
You know, changed in.
Ellis
Island.
What about Clemson? I'm like, nope.
And I hate to say it.
Answers no.
Be like.
But,
It might be.
Since it got so
just finished the
political. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's taken
I will tell you.
Yeah,
I say that.
Yeah.
That seems to be an area.
Terrorists.
All right.
Right.
To get back.
Really great.
It was so nice to see you.
Subject
So
tonight.
it's such a pleasure when I like talk to people. And I
Not
know
everything
everything
is, I'm not a military strategist, but not everything
Yeah.
can be solved.
Oh,
Like, I don't know.
no, we all went to high school and college together.
Right? That's all world. Okay, I have time for the.
Oh.
Yes.
My husband is not.
Right.
Oh my God.
So I refuse to do that.
Yeah, and you shouldn't. I know, I refuse to do that too. Oh, I won't do that.
I will do that, but I will not.
Yeah. I'll wear
Like,
long
it's not
skirt.
happening.
I'll wear it up to here. I will not cover my hair.
I have,
for
I
anyone.
have. Less and less in my current stage of life, but I have been known to give in and
Wow.
whatever gets the information across, but I won't have my husband give them.
No.
You want him to advertise ketchup for you? Sure, but talk about health? No, it's not.
No, and you're,
New York
yeah.
turbines. New York turbines.
And you
That's what
work,
I'm saying.
Okay,
You also
okay,
work
okay.
New York turbines. All I use is ketchup, but it's not, has nothing
Yeah.
to do with my work.
no, you work to get where you are.
Oh, you're
It's
making
you
a
or
joke.
it's nothing.
I was like,
Yeah.
this is a very conversation.
no,
I
I mean,
totally like inserted
the
myself in.
goal-
No, we like,
Pharmacy
it's women's
line.
empowerment.
That's
No
right.
offense.
Bullets on a cheek.
Yep.
Prices
All
being
right, it was good. I will talk to you. I'll
Yeah.
give you more details
Billions are
about
being-
the
Yes,
choices.
yes, I'm happy to do anything.
Amazing,
That,
amazing.
and I will wear a long dress.
Oh, no,
And it'll be up to here.
But no, the thing is.
Yeah, but it'll
They
just
care a
be-
little bit, but
It'll
only a
be
little
better.
bit.
They'll think I'm like, to each of you.
State. Oh, so
Yeah.
You
They
kind
care a
of.
little bit.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
I hear.
When I go to the Refuah 301 Health and Safety Fair every summer, and it's
But it would have been a
outdoors,
state
and I
that,
the
you know,
whole day with like a
things
very, very
were-
firm crowd.
Yeah.
Going in
Yeah.
a normal
It's
direction.
100 degrees every single year.
Oh, God.
And I can tell you,
Of, you know,
I am as
stage-
minimally covered to still be modest within that space as I can be
Fortunately,
because it is so hot.
So the goal
Peace
is.
process was
Yeah.
derailed.
Jeez.
Not Gaza as a state. but
It's
the whole-
crazy.
Anyway, it was good to see you.
Oh, good to
We'll
see
be
you
in
too.
touch.
Yes, that
Okay.
sounds good.
My, is the only.
Oh, yeah.
And they love it, like saying won't take off, I go, I wore that for 4 years, like, well, you gotta get a denim one, 'cause you don't have to wash it. She's like, I don't understand how you wear like a jeans skirt, I'm
But
like,
how
we
many,
lived in jeans.
how many girls do you have? Okay.
So they're rising seniors.
There'll be a day.
No, wait, rising seniors in
Like
college?
high school, no, my kids are young, you guys all have kids much younger.
Wow. Where did they go to high school?
Lane,
Lane, okay, Lane
Yeah.
Tech.
yeah,
Yes.
and Harry Seniors is freshman.
You know,
Where?
Syracuse.
their own state.
Oh, wow, we looked at Syracuse.
Don't have missiles.
Loved it. I fell in love with
I know,
Syracuse.
I pushed it, regarded that, I pushed it.
And
and
missiles
did
from
it.
Canada or from Mexico. Now,
Oh, we have-
And my husband was like, you only like it because it's like a mini Madison. I'm like, something about it,
No, no, I
Right?
agree.
like,
Yeah.
since Joey didn't like it.
Yeah.
The
You
question,
don't like it though?
they should,
Well,
and
he
the
didn't like
question
it
is how
since
it's
we
being
got there.
handled.
And then we're looking for
I,
cookies, like,
unfortunately,
where's the
Israeli
cookies?
governments have
None.
There aren't any, we're eating at a
recent
piece of like,
years
he was like.
not looked for
There's
solutions that are
nothing here.
solutions.
Yeah.
Actually,
So,
you know,
I was
I-
stressed.
Hamas was, you know, was
We even
really
like
created
the
by
stuff that was,
Israel
like,
in
the
a
old
way.
train.
And
That's
That station was
Wow.
very
Right,
Framed
it's,
by
it's not,
Israel.
not like a vibrant
seen as a way
college
to block Palestinians.
Yeah.
The campuses.
Eventually,
And that
the
retractable,
beast too
like
much,
the
it bites
dome.
The
thing.
jam drum, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
I just think like here's campus and.
It's very sad. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah,
wow.
I hope it was interesting.
Right.
And I,
That
it
it
was
was.
cold out, I wasn't
Right.
walking like
But I
all
guess
the
what
way
you're
down
saying
there,
is
watch them
They'll
lose.
have to,
And then, like, but here, like Henry, like,
just
like
gonna
the
have to
first half,
something
it was
to
the first half of our game.
Yeah.
stay there.
You know, from the freshman dorms, you walk down the
Yeah.
hill, it's like right there at the dome,
Oh, so then, yeah,
you know, so.
and
it's
you
like-
get jobs, like that school seems to really place
Yeah,
people
they,
well.
because it's.
If
like,
you go
know,
to the Har Zion synagogue,
community, so it's
Har
like
Zion,
like
sure.
alumni,
it's a church now.
Yeah, that, I like that.
whatever. So how old is your son now?
He's graduating from the academy.
Okay.
And he's going to,
It's a church.
pit.
Yeah, Har Zion is somewhere else. I mean, it's still, the congregation still
Wow.
exists.
Okay.
But
I was
you go
just
to
there quite a
Israel
lot this past year.
First, because each time is
Philadelphia?
mysterious.
Yeah, because I went to see the Eagles, I went to see the
Right,
Sixers.
I saw that when I was looking through my JUF news, like all the kids.
Neighborhood
are
is very
doing-
much changed.
I think every kid
Yeah.
from the academy.
The neighborhood is very much changed.
They pride themselves on trying
Yeah.
to catch that.
Black neighborhood.
Information, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty strong.
But it's
I
very,
was worried about this.
it's nice.
Stay up.
Exactly.
Houses were, everyone lived in a three-story house.
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought it would be like,
The houses are even bigger now. It's a very nice neighborhood.
I didn't care.
Oh,
no,
This
It
one I
sounded-
honestly didn't.
I gave a talk a few months ago
Yeah.
in
Oh,
Philly.
yeah.
I didn't get the, I didn't know.
The guy that was introducing me said I was born in Winfield.
Well, they
And I
said.
said, well, I was born in Winfield too.
How can we not know?
yeah, that was weird too.
Diamond Streets.
So how I.
Well, our parents may have,
Reproductive law. Well, you do family law, right?
our parents
Okay,
may
So
have.
you do like surrogate.
And it's your
contacts and
own,
stuff?
exactly.
With a little boy.
Quite neat.
So it's your own
Do you have,
practice.
does your family come from Poland?
Yeah.
Since we have the same name.
Yeah.
What's that?
That's
Does your
cool.
family come from Poland since we have the same
Big,
name?
like political, like office thing.
Yeah.
I didn't do well at it.
Oh, no.
I don't get the, maybe there's like
We
a
don't know
social
the
cues
origin
thing.
of
Like,
the
I don't
name.
get the social cues, but
I
I'm supposed to keep my
know.
mouth
I
don't
shut.
know the name.
I like having my own
Yeah, I
thing.
do.
I don't like having.
My
my
great-grandfather
business, But I like running my own.
immigrated
business and picking
from Central Europe to Argentina.
That's my favorite
In the
thing.
late
Right.
19th century. His name was
I don't
Fred.
know why, but
When he arrived in Argentina,
Where's your office downtown or are you?
he,
no, it's always been on.
Identified
Most of
himself
my
as chef.
friends don't want to meet, so we do.
and that's why we spell it this way. Because
Yeah,
the first
if I need
Spanish.
to meet with them, I meet
Yeah.
with them and stuff.
And we don't know why he changed
Yeah,
his
so
name.
it's like a treat. Yeah, yeah.
There's different family folklore about that.
Well, no, he's also